provisioned at the end of the conference about half an hour for public discourse. So the floor is open if anyone would like to make a comment or to ask a question. Yes, Daniel. Could you please use the microphone? Just turn it on. I was both. Out to the very end. There you go.
Oh, good. After hearing criticisms of current models and current regulations, I began to think of science as ritual. I mean, if you just put it in using numbers and graphs, then you can do anything, and technocracy goes along with it. And no matter how much information, real information is coming in, indicating probable troubles, we still have this idol of science and everything is okay and everything is being monitored. I don't know. Perhaps a real scientist can comment on it.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the title, Real Scientist. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that the problem really is with science or the way that we do science. There's a couple of comments here which have to be made. Number one, as our society has got much more technological and has got much more complex, so the art of doing science, and I do call it an art, has also got more complex and more difficult. It's now no longer possible to be the physicist in his own little cubicle thinking only of physics. You have to work with the biologist, you have to work with the chemist, you have to work with the psychiatrist, you have to work with the psychologist. So we're becoming more interdisciplinary in what we do, while still trying to maintain the ideal of scientific thought and scientific proof. However, there comes a point when the results that we do, the measurements that we make, leaves our lab and goes into the real world. And I think the real problem is there. What you do with the information that we give. And here, if I divulge slightly and go more to opinion, the problem comes down to the money. When our society is pushed forward by money, by consumerism in certain ways, and it goes unregulated, then you will abuse whatever information we give to get the product that you want. And I think here's the real problem, actually. The regulatory, the understanding of what regulation should be, the understanding of what policy should be, and how it should interact with what us as the scientists and the scientific community will happily give. We'll do our best to be as truthful as possible. We'll do our best, even if the facts aren't pleasant, to give only the facts as we possibly can. It's what happens afterwards is the real question, which puts it more in your field and in Alon's field. And Alon, I believe you have a comment. Could you pass?
I'd like to respond to that also on behalf of the Environmental Health Trust. In Deborah's presentation yesterday, just about her last slide was one indicating that we are joining another organization from Maryland and suing the Federal Communications Commission. Now, that's after over 10 years of staying in the background, coordinating research around the world so researchers communicate with each other. This is the first time that we've ever taken action like that, but it's just like Danielle brought up, it's time to do it, and so we're taking a risk by doing it, but on the other hand, if we don't, we're not getting anywhere.
Good point. I think Alon had a point to make here.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Paul and the Environmental Health Trust in putting together really a
I think, a comprehensive and very interesting workshop about which I knew relatively little before I began, and I know a little bit more now. I would say that we have to remember that we're in the realm of what's called risk-benefit analysis. In other words, there's no question that cell phones bring with them tremendous benefits. I'll give you an environmental one, okay, just in my own modest world. There was an article which came out recently about what cell phones provide in terms of products. And they went to a store which used to exist in the United States called Radio Shack. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Mo, and no longer there. And what were the top 20 products that Radio Shack sold in 1998 or something like that? It was alarm clocks and cameras and, of course, a phone and compasses and calculators, and went on and on and on. Lots and lots of stuff, which is now contained in this little thing. In terms of solid waste, that's a huge bonus, I think, in terms not only for the economics, just in terms of that. I could talk about empowering people, particularly women, to take chances because of being a greater sense of safety, all kinds of things there. But on the other hand, obviously there's some risks. So beyond, I think the major theme of this gathering is that a lot of the risks are unnecessary and could be reduced without any social cost. And secondly, if you ask me as a policy person, to me the one question which is which needs to be addressed immediately is what is exposure to children? Because this is truly an involuntary situation. Truly, this is the most sensitive population. And the notion of limiting sales of cell phones to children below a certain age in the same way we limit cigarettes or alcohol makes sense to me. The Israeli school system's policy of integrating cell phones into the classroom seems to me lunacy at this point. Those are the kind of things which I would urge from a policy perspective to focus, and of course of education. I think it's legitimate if a individual looking at this risk and saying I'm willing to accept a 300% greater incidence of or a risk of a brain cancer so that I can have access to a cell phone as I want, given the low likelihood of them getting it, that is not an unreasonable decision, but it should be informed. But I think in terms of children, there needs to be a lot more sober discussion with decision makers, because I think that we may end up paying a price for that particular policy.
A very fair point. We have a question over here from Shaul.
I just want to mention that I'm representing here the Research and Information Center of the Knesset, and that we are presently working exactly on a paper on 5G and health issues. And the idea is this paper will be presented to the member of Knesset that ordered this paper with some recommendations. And here I would like to share with you a few of my thoughts. And see what you think, because here I'm turning to the practical policy side of things. One of the thoughts that came up in my mind during this very good meeting, very good conference, is that maybe, hopefully, we should have a functioning Knesset soon. Maybe it would be good to set up a joint committee of the Environment Committee and the Health Committee, Environment and Health Committee, to deal specifically with non-ionizing radiation, like following up the 2006 legislation, and going specifically into the issues of 5G. Just let me explain to you this model. I'm not inventing this model. We used this a few years ago together with member of Knesset Dov Chanin, when we set up the Joint Committee of Health Committee and Environment for researching and deciding upon policy in the Haifa Bay region. And I'm sure that the conclusions of that committee were used by the Land Authority of Israel and also influenced their way of thought about the Haifa Bay today. And I'm sure most of you know that the Land Authority of Israel wants to clear the Haifa Bay from industries. So I believe this sort of model could be very well for this situation. This is one thought, and Alona, I'd like to hear what you think about this. Second thought is that we have to strengthen the interdisciplinary research. As you said, physics, biology, medicine, policy, and originally the legislation of 2006 planned something like this, but it sort of became what we know today as TNUDA. And the question is, I'm putting up an idea here, and the question is whether it would be good in the committee that I proposed just before to suggest allocating budget for a new institute that will be much more efficient, or maybe to take TNUDA and widen its scope and make it a serious research institute dealing with non-ionizing radiation. So thank you. I'd like to hear what you think about this.
I'd like for that first comment to pass it back to Alon for his response. And for the second comment, I'd like to respond myself, and then we'll pass over to Eli.
I think for new, unrecognized risks, it's very important that the parliament is informed. Clearly, 5G is on its way to Israel as an economy which is committed to being cutting-edge, high-tech. Ready or not, it's going to come here. Better to be ready. So I think it's a fine idea, and I will talk to people that I know who might be in a position to welcome it.
Just before Eli, I'd like to respond.
Let me just repeat a special
Maybe not.
plea to not overlook the special risks of those with involuntary occupational exposures to radio frequency microwave. Now, in Israel, this of course means mainly our defense industry, and mainly our young men and women who are manning the radar equipment which is designed to protect us. We have to protect those who are protecting us. And over again, this group gets pushed to the side and neglected and overlooked. And therefore, I think we have to be particularly grateful to Moran and her group Zohar for doing their very, very pioneering work under very, very difficult conditions. And this group must be supported, backed, and protected.
I think, actually referring partly to your comment there earlier as well, to answer your second part there, Shaul, there is a need for an institute, yes. And speaking as a research scientist inside academia, the biggest problem we have today is the lack of funding and the constraints placed on funding. And this is a big problem because frequently, in order for us to get funding, we have to answer to the demands of the funding authority, what it wants researched, not necessarily what we'd like researched, but what it wants researched. And so that restraint can be very restrictive. There is need for an institute. If you have a conference like this, where at one end we have a microbiologist like Ronnie Seger, you have a physicist like myself, you have a policy person like Alon, you have an epidemiologist like Deborah, you can see that the need for an interdisciplinary, independent research institute into this question is paramount. And it's those two words, interdisciplinary and independent. And that's the real point. Yes, we do need a research institute for this, as an answer to your question. Yes.
Interdisciplinary research and academic freedom. Because this event has nearly been cancelled, and a parallel event that should have been taking place yesterday in Hebrew was cancelled under the presumption that EHS and these kind of topics we've been discussing are not part of science and do not meet the relevant academic standards. And I'm talking about an event of which five of the 7 presenters talked in this event, and the 6th is present here also as well.
Thank you. Yes, we have a comment from Mo.
So, sorry, but we will need your help in sorting that other event out in order to make sure it does take place later on.
Thank you. Mo.
I'm really impressed to hear what you're presenting because it needs to be done. What I want to make a distinction between what you're proposing and what's happening in the United States. We have two organizations, the Federal Communications Corporation and the Food and Drug Administration, that are supposed to be I'm sorry, the two organizations, the Food and Drug Administration and the Federal Communications Commission, which are supposed to be doing the kind of thing that you were talking about. And here we are suing the FCC because they're not doing it. The other thing that I was impressed with in one of the presentations yesterday was that what's happened in Israel is that the opportunity to become a company doing cell phone communication has been opened up to many others. I just read yesterday that a judge is about to approve the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint in the United States, making one less company. So they're big companies, and one of the biggest, AT&T, is strongly behind 5G. There is a difference, though. There's been a reticence in Israel to spend more money on the sites, the transmission sites, whereas AT&T is looking to spend hundreds of billions to build transmission sites that are every 100 yards on every street in the cities. And the question that I have, and I don't know that anyone has an answer, is who's going to pay for that kind of construction to make 5G work in Israel?
It's a very good point. Would anyone like to respond?
Government said it will invest, I think, about $500 million in subsidizing 5G deployment. This was in the press. So why would the government subsidize 5G? That's a different question.
I'd like to say something. So just to join how important the idea of a committee on this topic is, and that it should also include a conversation about electro-hypersensitivity. Clearly, one of the outcomes of this event is how very real the health effects are beyond thermal, and to acknowledge it as a real disability, to think about accessibility, mainly for children in school. This is a huge issue that we're dealing with in the electro-hypersensitivity society in Israel, to think about compensation. So this is a very, very real topic. Thank you.
Just to add, not so much to Maya's comment, but to Danny's comment, industry in Israel is actually refusing. It's not willing to pay the money for infrastructure. Now, this, you may argue, is because they were greedy to an extreme in doshing out the profits much earlier on, and they simply don't have anything left. But it also, I think, is an indication of the huge infrastructure costs that 5G rollout, true 5G rollout, is going to incur. And yeah, who is going to pay? And it's not so clear, at least in Israel, that there are people, industry wants to pay. Okay, do we have any other topics? Any other comments? Please.
That rumors say that deployment of LED street lighting is the first step in the deployment of 5G. And we see rapid deployment of LED street lighting, which also has adverse health effects which are undiscussed yet. So your committee should address that thing as well, because some problems do not warrant only interdisciplinary research, but also should be taken in the interdisciplinary perspective of cluster of problems.
There is also one final comment I would make along the ideas of setting up an institute. Would we need it? Beyond that, yes, we would need it. There is a question of forming a barrier between funding, okay, and influence. As a research scientist, as I've said, that barrier is vital to guarantee academic freedom. It is vital to guarantee any independent research. So that should also be a point that's brought up in any discussion in the Knesset on making such an institute. If that is the last comment, then I will officially close this conference. I would like to thank all of you from the depths of my heart, especially Meg, especially Alasdair, and all our foreign speakers that have participated in this rather unique Zoom conference. And thank you very much. Just to let you know, we will be eventually placing all the presentations online, and we hope to produce a document and a publication about some of the talk, some of what's been exposed here, and also some of the recommendations. So keep your eyes open. בבקשה.